We can build economy where you can gain, I can gain too. Our ancestors did that before. They did that before this international criminality that we now have as a model of economy.
There were so many gaps and how much people were scrambling to try and protect themselves and the things that they were doing that actually were contributing to climate change. Like, adding plastic bottles to the front of your coastlines is going to just perpetuate the problem.
One of the ways that our ancestors preserved nature is to have a direct interaction with nature. In that, for example, they have sacred parts that you are not supposed to destroy because they know that if they destroy that, that is going to be a collateral effect. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in today's episode of the Obehi Podcast. I remain your host, Obehi Ewonfo. Today, we're going to be exploring an important conversation because I have an interesting guest who have been making contribution to the life of other people around her. That is what we promote here a lot, that our life should be at the service of other. So I'm really happy to have you here with us, Arianna. Could you tell us a bit about yourself? Maybe that is where we're going to spend a few seconds, right? Please go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, my name's Arianna, and I often say that my work sits at the intersection of identity, movement, and justice. I'm of a Welsh Iraqi heritage, and I grew up in London, and a big part of my worldview comes from this colourful, multicultural background, and also my family's experience of internal displacement in Iraq that has really shaped the work that I do today. And I think growing up hearing those stories, I became very aware very early how systems can really uproot people, but also how people rebuild and how much wisdom exists in community who have lived through instability. And that really has shaped everything that I've gone on to do.
That is so interesting. Iraq, that is what you mentioned, right?
Say again one more time.
You are from Iraq originally, right?
Yeah, so my dad is from Iraq and my mum is from Wales.
Okay. You see, not many people, no, I don't think I've ever interviewed somebody that is originally from Iraq here because that is a very deep history now in humanity, talking of the Mesopotamia. And that is something really interesting. I don't know if that is something that you usually talk about, but I would be curious to learn more about that. How much do you know about your Asian heritage, which is, like I said, is one of the oldest in the world?
I definitely don't know enough. And my dad is trying to educate us all the time. And it's been really nice having that complement of having the kind of like British, Welsh side and also the Iraqi side because you can really see the differences in culture. And I don't know if you have sort of many guests from the Middle East, but the Middle East and Middle Eastern people, they are so hospitable. Such a big part of the culture is family, it's community, and I think that really instilled a sense of duty within me to serve my community, to serve my village, whether that's my immediate community in London, whether that's my community in Iraq, who half of them I haven't met, half of them, I've never had the fortune of being able to visit, but I still have that really, really deep connection with them, and I think that stems from this legacy of the Middle East of creation. They were inventors. They invented the wheel. I mean, my dad might claim that we invented more things that we did. Numbers, medicine. The list goes on. But I do know that we have a very rich history of innovation, and I think that really ties and feeds into the person that I am today.
Absolutely. And of course, you can see now why I'm very passionate about that because we talk about storytelling a lot. We interview different experts from different parts of the world. So we just love the idea to be able to learn from our heritage from the past because we are what we are today because of what have happened before in the past. So we can never ignore that. All right. So tell me, have you even ever stayed in Iraq? Have you visited Iraq? What can you say about that?
Yeah, like I said, unfortunately, I haven't been able to. There was a lot of conflict, and continues to be a lot of conflict in Iraq, and so we were never. It was never safe to. And also, my family, and as I'll go on to explain, had to migrate. So my dad came here to study when he was, 23 and never went back because he got a job here and built a life and, met my mum and we came along. But we still had family who were in our hometown but had to migrate to the north. And so I think for my dad, revisiting Iraq right now didn't make much sense because it's not like you'd be visiting his hometown where he grew up. It's like me being from London and my children, if we moved, if I lived somewhere else, them then visiting Scotland. It's not the same. And I think he wants us to go back when it's what he once knew, and I don't know if it ever will be. But I really hope that we get an opportunity, in his lifetime, in my lifetime, to rebuild those memories for him and connect with our family that are there.
Oh, that's so lovely. That's so lovely. It will be, we hope that it will be. We need more peace in this world because there is a lot to celebrate. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So actually, when I first went into university, I ended up publishing my first paper on internal displacement based off my family's lived experiences. So it was an empirical longitudinal paper that I spread across both my undergrad and my master's thesis, which I did studying between France and Norway, where I really focused on social identity. So I researched forced mobility because my family had to move because of ISIS and many other conflicts in the region. But I was looking at the gaps in protection for displaced people and how that made them view themselves within society. So we often focus on legality, but how does the status of being a refugee, being internally displaced, being other, they talk about this idea of otherness. How does that actually affect how you position yourself in the world and the trickle down effect that has on society as a whole? So it was really fantastic for me to dive into that, but also connect with my family through it. So I interviewed 25 people from Iraq who had been displaced. Some of them were my direct family members, some of them were connections that had snowballed through family and community links. And it really allowed me to give them a platform and a voice to share, their musings, their frustrations, their inspirations. And yeah, fortunately that paper got published, which was probably my biggest sort of source of pride, being able to give them a voice in a world that doesn't typically do that.
That's lovely. That is another rabbit hole again that I would like to explore.
Yeah,
Was
absolutely.
there any particular reason that drove you to making that research that you, of course, you now say is one of your best works so far? What led
Mhm.
you to that?
What I found is that we often talk about vulnerable populations in this very passive way. But the reality is that these communities are actually incredibly resourceful. And that's partly why, I talk about reframing things and people as lighthouses, not as stories of tragedies, but actually as holders of a solution. And that ties into this idea of Mesopotamia, of the Middle East, being innovators. And they always were the leading heads in, as I said, like science, culture, and then now suddenly a lot of people see the Middle East as this sort of stigmatized behind region. But that is because, we as the West have destroyed what they once created. And I really wanted to reframe that narrative and give them back that agency and that voice to be like, actually, you don't need to pity us. Just stop disrupting our ecosystems and we'll thrive again. And I really wanted to start that chain reaction.
Hmm, that's interesting. That's interesting. Because you now, Ariana, you are at the crossroad
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that your father is coming from Iraq, your mother is coming from the West. So you own both worlds. They both belong to you. You are Iraqi, you are Wales, you are UK, you are everything, So I think people like you are in a better position to be able to shape history because now you don't necessarily need to choose one side. You can choose both sides. You can choose the whole of it. It all belongs to you. So how what you do from that moment becomes very important now because what we are looking for is a world where we can live in peace. It is possible for us to live in peace. Honestly, it is. We can build we can build economic model that doesn't necessarily need to be a zero-sum game in the sense that for me to gain, you need to lose. That is not the only way to build economy. We can build economy where you can gain, I can gain too. I don't necessarily need to destroy you for me to uh, grow. So I think that is possible. Walter Wallace, in his book in 1910 titled The Science of Getting Rich, talked a lot about the idea of collaboration
Mhm.
because there is a lot to do in this world. But unfortunately, there are some people in the West who are unable to understand this simple concept. They
Mhm.
believe that the world is limited. They believe that the resources in this world are limited. They believe everything is limited. Therefore, they must operate from this scarcity mindset. And this is really hurting the world because that is what drove a few Europeans to. Okay, I'm sorry I'm diving into this area, but I promise I'm not going to stay long there because this is not a political conversation, but of course it's touchy, you
Please
know.
keep going.
You see, this scarcity mindset among the Europeans is what drove them to Africa. It's what drove them to the America, where they massacre millions of people. Millions of people. Historians are saying more than 100 million people were killed. For what? For what? But I believe that people like you, who are sort of mixed in the sense that you own both this, you own the entire world. Of course, as a younger generation, you have the right. You sit at the table to be able to make a decision that doesn't necessarily need to be a vengeful decision, but a kind of decision that need to build a better world. Europe can be part of this world. Africa can be part of this world. Middle East can be part of this world. Asia can be part of this world. We can all live in peace. It is possible. That is the kind of world that we want. And it doesn't require rocket science to think about that because our ancestors did that before. They did that before this international criminality that we now have as a model of economy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, it's reframing the narrative of like these vulnerable communities who, we have to feel sorry for. Like, yes, we should feel sorry for if that sparks, people to try and create change, whether that's through, financial means, or whether that's through writing a book, or whether that's through visiting in person to seeing how you can help rebuild communities. But ultimately, these people are only in that way because of whether it's Western imposition or whatever the trigger is. And they are, they have every right to be as strong in this space and leaders and innovators as we so often view the West as having the power to do, and we don't give them enough of a platform and the agency to do that. And I think that's where my role, or at least I've decided that that's what my duty is as a steward to these people, to my family, but also to my global community, my global family, and that's really how my path into the leadership space, into the work that I'm doing. It wasn't planned. It was more like stepping into spaces because no one seemed to be creating them. So I don't know if it's helpful maybe to speak a little bit about the work that I do and some of the spaces that I've been to help
Absolutely.
frame that conversation.
Absolutely. That is why we are here. We usually first talk about the basis, where we are coming from, because that helps the people to be able to make the connection. Because now we understand that you are from Iraq. That is very important for us. Otherwise, we'll just talk about you on the surface. We know you to the background now. We know
Mhm.
you to thousands of years now because we know that there is a history behind you. You are not just here because you just wake up and say, I want to do a project. There is a reason behind that. That is why we are actually focusing on the story. Now that we
Absolutely.
know you, your background, tell us about what you do.
Yeah, and I love that concept that you just referred to. I always say that things don't exist in a vacuum. Like anger doesn't exist in a vacuum. The people, my family in Iraq, they're not angry because of nothing. They're angry because of impositions, because of rights that have been stripped away, and also my work doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists because of the people that came before me, and absolutely, I'm happy to share a little bit about my path. So as I mentioned, so I published this paper and I was really keen to stay in the migration, international policy space, and I had a really fortunate opportunity. So every year, the UK selects 4 people to attend either the G7, which is the Global Seven, it's a UN conference, which is the 7 sort of strongest economies, supposedly, that debate, they negotiate, and they basically produce policy papers to try and improve the global community. So you've got the G7, the G20, which is the 20 countries included in that. And then you have COP. And COP is an annual conference of parties, which effectively brings together the majority of countries in the world to discuss issues relating to climate. So I saw this opportunity and I thought, why not try my luck? I don't have any experience in all of the themes covered by every topic, by every conference. But what you did is you had to do a video. You had to send in a video based on one of the themes in the conferences. And I realized that there was the only theme that was included in every single one, which was climate. And I was like, okay, I don't have a climate background, but I do have a background in migration. And I was doing a lot of research and I figured that, it's a pretty unavoidable fate, with climate change and everything that's happening around the world, migration is inevitable and not the good kind, not the, kind where you have agency to move for work or for opportunities, but the kind where you don't have a say in it. So I thought, how about I do an application based on climate migration, and I applied to all 3 conferences. And I then got this email saying, you've been selected to be the head UK youth delegate to COP. And I thought,
Wow, that's
oh
lovely.
no, I thought, oh no, they've got the wrong girl. I think I've taken this a bit too far. As much as I was, confident in my abilities to learn, I didn't have much of a climate background. So I thought, okay, this is a challenge, but the reward for good work is more work. And I was like, I'm happy to throw myself into this and represent the people that need representing. So it was a year-long tenure, and within that, I got some fantastic opportunities, both to understand the domestic landscape in the UK, what our priorities are surrounding climate change, surrounding the vulnerabilities that come as a result of it. But I also got a fantastic opportunity. I got a scholarship through an organization called Peace Boat US, and I sailed around Latin America for 3 weeks rather with 13 fantastic youth leaders from around the world, doing research for the UN Decade of Ocean Science. So we were conducting scientific research in Panama, Guatemala, and Mexico. And the idea is that we bring this research back and write up UN reports. So not only at this point did I have a domestic understanding of priorities, but I was really able to feed that in with information from the international landscape. What is the concern and the priorities of people around the world? And especially, the UK, we have a lot of overseas territories. We have a lot of people that are part of our Commonwealth, and we take 81% of our overseas territory biodiversity data into our data because it makes us look good. All these Caribbean islands who are doing fantastic work and have fantastic biodiversity, it really, really helps pad out our mission. Whereas when it comes to things like voting for Brexit, things that affect where they work, where they live because they have UK passports, we don't give them a say. They don't have any right to vote or represent themselves on the global stage. So, it really helped me understand the dynamics globally that existed on a very bureaucratic level. And this experience, it really helped me appreciate how much power young people had in this space to mobilize with such limited resources, zero funding, zero access to, whether it's education, whether it's tools, what they were able to achieve. And I was like, God, imagine how much impact they're going to be able to have if we just find the right support to actually guide them in this space. So as a result, I co-founded the Youth Initiative Development Program because I saw how much brilliance existed in young people who just needed the right ecosystem. And then opportunities kept unfolding. So my full-time job is I lead the education programs at an organization called Island Innovation, where we run capacity building programs for young leaders, especially from island and climate vulnerable regions. And the reason that I work in this space is because for me, it's on a needs basis. These are the most vulnerable frontline communities. And so these are the people that we should prioritize putting our energy, putting our money into. So alongside the climate work, I've been very, very lucky to be involved in, the human rights lens of it and human rights spaces. So I've served as a delegate to the UN Human Rights Forum, and now I'm a Sustainable Ocean Alliance fellow, seeing how we're connected with nature. And all of these experiences, really, they orbit around the same thing, creating systems that don't just listen to vulnerable communities, but they actually respond to them. And for me, that's been the most powerful part of my work.
That's so incredibly beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ariana. All right, and I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to talk about climate change because you spend a lot of time there, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, because I just went to the United Nations website just now, then I was just playing around with this article. What is climate change? And then, of course, I will go inside and all of that. So, could you say something about climate change? What are we talking about here?
hmm It looks very different depending on where you are. So for me, I live in London, and climate change means that sometimes I get slightly warmer winters, or the summers last a bit longer, and I'm like, fantastic. I'm a warm-blooded person. I love it when I don't have to wear 5 layers. And although I'm acutely aware of what's happening behind the scenes and what a slightly longer, warmer summer means, in the moment I'm like, fantastic. But that's because I'm very sheltered. I live in a city that doesn't feel the daily impacts of climate change. However, I've visited communities where climate change is not such a luxury. So you have, in Jamaica, they just had Hurricane Melissa wipe down, a whole island of communities. Schools were shut. You know, wires down. My manager, she is Jamaican, so she was, uncontactable for a week. When in the Pacific, 90% of Pacific Islanders live 5 kilometers from the coast and only a few centimeters above sea level. So when you have natural disasters, which are becoming more frequent because of climate change, you're every angle you're being hit by, and you don't have the geography, not only the geography, but the resources to protect yourself. And you know, for us, I often speak about this idea again of climate change being a privilege to deal with, because, for example, in the Indo-Pacific, so for example, Sri Lanka and Indonesia, they had the 2004 tsunami, and they got completely, communities flattened, lives lost. And I visited both Indonesia and Sri Lanka this year, and they they don't have very good systems in place when it comes to recycling and provisions that we see as like a direct way that we can combat climate change. As individuals, we can't do it all. But I realize that for them, it's a luxury. Like they're trying to survive. They're trying to rebuild communities that are still damaged from a tsunami that happened 20 years ago. And so for them to install a recycling plant on their island, like that is not their concern. And they don't see the link, between the day-to-day incremental changes and small habits that you can make and how that might affect the bigger picture. Because of course you don't think, like, at a very simple level, recycling your milk bottle is going to prevent a tsunami from coming. And yes, it's not as simple as that, don't get me wrong. But everything has a domino effect, and it's about educating people. And I think why I care so much about education is because the gaps in education are really the catalyst for this climate getting worse. I can tell a quick story about when I was doing the research in Panama, and we did this fantastic conservation project with the keystone animal in the region, which is the green turtle. And we were checking the health of the turtles. We, were seeing which ones had been affected by boat propellers, things like that. We were doing some really, really rewarding work. And on the way back, we passed this island on where we were on a boat, and I was like, oh, I saw all this rubbish on the coastline. I said, what a shame that, clearly all this rubbish had collected from the oceans, and landed on this island on the coast. Ultimately it's probably swept up somewhere from the Atlantic or the Pacific, and ended up here just as by default. And they said no, the people on the island, they're so desperate, and they don't have the education, they don't have the resources to combat it, that they think actively putting Colgate bottles, Coca-Cola bottles, things like that on their coastline will help prevent coastal erosion. And whether that's because they think that it is actually a defense barrier, or whether that's because they have no other option, they don't have, governments putting in, like sea walls or anything like that. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I didn't get to meet them. But all I know is that full well, based off, you don't have to be a climate expert to know that putting a Listerine bottle on your coastline is not going to prevent a tsunami from hitting you. And that was so stark to me, that there were so many gaps, and how much people were scrambling to try and protect themselves, and the things that they were doing that actually were contributing to climate change. Like, adding plastic bottles to the front of your coastlines is going to just perpetuate the problem. So my whole job is basically trying to combat that in any ways I can. And I genuinely believe that systemic change happens when people at the margins become architects of the center. And that's what I'm trying to do, build architects of the future.
That's very interesting. In terms of the solution that you prescribe for the people, what do you usually tell them? Okay, now this will take us now to some dimension in that we are okay. There is a lot that need to be said about climate change. There is a lot of theory and literature that need to be understood. I'm not really going into the deeper side of it, the science, the metaphysics, or there are deeper parts that I'm not going into just now. Okay, but looking at the common one that we can see, the natural conservation. The thing that I'm looking at there will be balance. In that we have been on this earth for millions of years. No, we are not new here. We understand how to treat nature, so that, because it's not like we are saving nature. Okay, I think somebody need to understand that we are not saving nature. We are actually saving ourselves, because
Absolutely.
nature is too big for us to destroy. What will only happen is that, since we are energy, we are also code. We are information. Nature is information, and all this record is written in the nature's DNA. So that if we were to be too dangerous for nature, what it would just do is, it would not change it would just change one code or two in its DNA. We will be eliminated from the equation. Humanity and everything that have to do with us will be gone forever. So it's not like really nature is going to die. No, we are the one that are going to die. There is no threat to nature. There is no threat to water. There is no threat to the land. There is no threat to the air, to the oxygen, because these things are too big for us to change.
Yeah.
But we can make a little contribution, so that for us to be alive, we need to allow the balance to be. And this is not even a rocket science. Because if you go now to many indigenous belief systems and their way of life, you will see that each of them have natural preservation baked into their way of life. Each of them. Let me give you an instance. One of the ways that our ancestors preserved nature is to have a direct interaction with nature. In that, for example, they have sacred parts that you are not supposed to destroy, because they know that if they destroy that is going to be a collateral effect, like what you are calling tsunami, earthquake. Of course, that is not the only cause of earthquake. That is not the only cause of tsunami. But if we can prevent what we can prevent, then it's better we don't even do that. Like, for example, when you say that in this particular river there is a god there, with me, this river need to be treated with all sort of respect. You don't need to throw trash into this water, because it is sacred.
Mm-hmm.
But if we respect this water, then you see this water have a trickle effect on the environment. But if we no longer respect this water because we believe that we are now civilized, we can throw
Mm-hmm.
trash in this water. I'm just using that as a very blank example, no? But what will happen now, the water will block. By the time the water block, now the water, you cannot stop the water because it's too big. It splash the water on the land. And that
Mm-hmm.
begin to build up until it becomes a very big problem. It started from us not able to understand the balance because we used to do that before. So in terms of the solution, what are you prescribing?
I just want to go to what you said at the beginning there. So we've been running masterclass sessions recently for through Island Innovation, and our latest masterclass leader was Kumi Naidu, who is president of the Non-Proliferation Fossil Fuel Treaty, and also he worked for Greenpeace, Amnesty International, and his whole message was like, "Listen, nature's going to be fine. it's us that's not." And you know,
Absolutely.
if that's what we're willing to deal with, fine. You know, we will reduce our lifespan, but nature, time and time again, has proven it's able to replenish and it will come back stronger. Um, and so it's very much trying to push that narrative of like, listen, don't worry about the trees, don't worry about the corals, like they will come back. It's just us that won't. And so, you know, people are at the end of the day, we can all be very selfish. And if you show people that actually, you know, we're in danger, that I think is the key narrative, because you can't have a relationship with something you don't understand. And a lot of people don't live by water. They've never seen a coral reef. They've never met an elephant. Like why would you care about something that is so, you know, it's a picture on a screen at the end of the day. And so what we're trying to do is two things within that lens is we want to connect more people to nature. So, you know, providing opportunities for people to actually see firsthand the effects, or rather get a connection with nature, so that even if you don't see the effects, you care about the implication that something might happen to that object, whether it's, you know, a physical coral or whether it's a, like I said, an elephant. These are my two references for this example. But I'm sure you know what I mean. But so it's one, helping people connect directly with nature, but two, filling in those education gaps, and that's where I come in. So as part of Island Innovation, we created the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy. And so this was a 2-year program funded by Open Society Foundation. And what we do is we created a capacity building program that really pushes for young people to be part of frontline regions. Sorry, frontline regions to be part of global decisions. Got Friday brain. So they're in the rooms, not just as storytellers, but as strategists, right? So we trained up over 100 young people from the Caribbean over 2 years, and got 30 of them on their national delegation badges, negotiating for their countries at COP. So you know, we're giving them a chair to take to the rooms, to the tables, to pull up and say, we need a voice in this because we are the ones being most impacted. And the first year that we did that was COP28, and we had someone from St. Martin, who it's so for those of you who aren't aware of St. Martin, it's an island in the Caribbean, and it's half Dutch, half French. It's a very kind of unique setting where you have an island basically split by two territories. And we selected a delegate who's fantastic. Her name's Riddy. And she was the only person from the whole country, from both territories, at COP. So there were no ministers, there were no industry leaders, no one there representing her island, which had been hit by Hurricane Irma, hit by, you know, a plethora of insistent global extreme weather events. And it was just heartwarming to see her being able to represent a community that never gets a voice at the table. And not just are we learning so much, you know, are they learning so much from the programs? You know, we're teaching them everything from the climate health nexus to how to tap into climate finance to UNFCCC negotiations. But my goodness, I'm learning so much from them. And at COP last year, which was in Azerbaijan, we had this really nice like reflection circle at the end of the week, and we said, oh, what were your takeaways? What did you notice? And there was a delegate from Bermuda, And she said, one thing that really, was eye-opening for me is in the girls' bathrooms, in the washrooms, you can tell where people are from based on how much water they use. So she says, you can tell if someone's from the West because they'll turn the tap on and then they'll sort of like play with their hair a bit. They'll do a bit of makeup and they'll put soap on. They'll leave the water running while they lather the soap. They'll wash their hands. They'll adjust their jumper. And then about 5 minutes later, the tap is turned off. And then she said, you can tell when someone's from somewhere where water's scarce or a climate vulnerable region because they'll lather the soap on before, they'll be really thorough with it. Then they'll turn the tap on a little bit, put water on, turn the tap off, wash it while the tap's off, then, put the tap back on, rinse the rest off. And I thought, I'm definitely that first person. Like, it wouldn't even cross my mind to turn the tap off while I'm going about my business. And I would never have observed that kind of behavior. I would never, you're just running around trying to think about negotiations and where I need to be. And actually, if you slow down and observe the daily practices of people, it really shines a light on our lack of education, not theirs. She knows full well that if you if you leave the tap on, unnecessarily water's going to be wasted, and I know that too. But I don't think to make those changes, and that for me is just symptomatic of the problem that we have.
Thank you for that. And education, I can understand there is a solution on. And also, if maybe I don't want to go back to the economic model again, no? Because it's obvious that the economic model that we have today is obviously wrong. It's saying that it's consuming the world, it's consuming everything that we have, and not because it's an existential need. It's because it's just a waste. Because if you go to the food industry, for example, you look at the estimate of the amount of food that is wasted in this world, you begin to wonder about why. A lot of people are hungry. How come there is this systemic wastage of food continuously? Because I think economy should have been based on our need. In that I need to eat, so I go to cultivate food and eat. And because I need to depend on this land, I will respect this land so that the land will give me back again, and I will give back again. It becomes this circle. But now we just produce, not because we really want to eat. And anyway, that is another angle. I don't want to throw it just now because again, we are not on that class today.
No, it's absolutely true, and it remind like this cyclical, idea is really beautiful and something that we miss a lot in at least my echo chamber in London. And I was talking to someone from Tuvalu, and if anyone doesn't know where Tuvalu is or why it's relevant to the context, is it's the first country in the world that's due to go underwater. So it's based in the Pacific, and the highest natural point on the island is 6 feet. So again, imagine you've got any kind of extreme weather event, you're getting absolutely destroyed from either side. And I was speaking to a Tuvaluan delegate at COP again, and they are the first nation that is due to be digitally mapped in the cloud. So what they've accepted is, listen, we're gonna drown effectively. Our island is gonna drown. People are gonna relocate. So what we want to do is we want to map everything from the language to the trees to the roads. We want to map it on the metaverse. So it's going to be the first country in the world that's going to be in this like cloud, in the same way that we have a cloud, where we store our photos from our phone. And I asked her, what do you think about this? Because they're not trying to save the island. They're aware it's happening. So I said, is this a good solution? I read good things about it in the news, but how does it actually feel being, living through this? And she said, in theory, it's our only hope, but when they're born, so when you have a child, what every family in Tuvalu does, or at least from what I understood, is you throw the umbilical cord into the sea, so you're giving back to the ocean, and then you plant the placenta under a coconut tree. So then when the coconut tree grows, it gives it nutrients, and then the coconut falls down, and it's a circle of life of like you're regenerating and then you're taking from the tree. And she was like, how do you map that into a metaverse? How do you map that connection to the land and to nature into this hypothetical cloud? And that has really stuck with me throughout my work, and I've never really forgotten that, and it really informs a lot of the practices that we try and foster, keeping that cyclical relationship with nature and trying to preserve it in the best way we can before it's too late.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just for the record, it is not that the human being is the only one that is responsible for the natural dynamics of the things that are going to change. Because things are going to change. It doesn't depend on us. We only are accelerating it or deaccelerating it because we are a little dot in the library of nature. We are almost too insignificant to even affect the change that we want. Because it would take maybe an asteroid to touch the earth. Everything that we have planned, including our nuclear bomb, will dissolve. They will not make any effect, okay? I understand that, okay, we are saying all we are saying because it is in our nature to act responsibly. Because if we act responsibly, we will not accelerate our demise. But if we don't act responsibly, we will quicken our demise. That is essentially what it is. It's not that, because there is a lot of power under the earth that is okay. If you want to understand how powerful this earth is, go to the mountain and look at the volcano. In fact, sometime I think that was 2008. We went to the mountains of Dolomite. Dolomite is in the northern part of Italy. So there was this G8 that was going to be organized in Aquila. So then we went there to sort of do a human chain around the three peak of the Dolomite Mountain. And it was a beautiful experience. So as you are in the Dolomite Mountain, of course, it's a very beautiful part of Italy. You can basically see where we have been coming from. In the sense that once upon a time, that thing that you are seeing was under the water. Because that is the only conclusion that you can have. But how did the water move from that place to where it is today? That water is no longer there. That is not because we did it. We were not even in existence then. I am trying to say that there are too many forces at play that whatever we are doing will become irrelevant by the time nature actually take its turn. But we can help to eliminate us in the equation or try to exist a little bit more, because we're not the first to be here and we will not be the last to be here too. We are just in a journey. That is how I want to put it. So what kind of message would you want to leave to the audience that are listening to you, Arianna?
I can only speak from my lived experiences, and I guess some of the biggest lessons I've learned is first, you don't need permission to lead. I mean, half of my journey came from simply stepping up because no one else was doing it, and I would never look back. I'm so pleased that I took that initiative. Secondly, I would say it's okay to be driven by both hope and anger. That combination is really powerful, and hopefully you can, by applying your hope, turn other people's anger into that hope as well, and have that chain reaction. And third, change is deeply relational. The partnerships that you build matter more than the platforms that you speak on. And I think what gives me hope is honestly the people that I've worked with, like whether it's students in the Caribbean, whether it's indigenous leaders in the Pacific, or simply people navigating displacement from my family. They're not waiting to become future leaders. It's not this title you need on your LinkedIn. They are already these lighthouses. They're the keepers of the lighthouse today, and my role is just to amplify that. And you don't need a degree. You don't need to know loads of languages. You really don't need anything besides a bit of initiative to make that change. And I really want more people to take it as their responsibility, because if we share that load, it makes it a lot easier, and our impact is much bigger. So yeah, I think agency is everything, and we have it to some degree. Everyone has it to some degree. So it's how you use it, whether you use it to invest in oil companies to make your millions and retire at 30, or whether you use it to have purpose that guides you every day. People struggle with mental health, physical health, and so many other things that we don't necessarily have agency over, but we do have agency over how we treat people and how we positively impact people. And I think that's all we all can try and do.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the work that you are doing, Ariana. I really appreciate that. And for the fact that I can see that you are a young woman who is embarking on this journey. And imagine the impact that we have on other young people out there. Because this future belongs to you. You are going to have to write it the way you want to present it also to the other one that are coming after you. Again, I repeat, we are just in a journey. It's not going to end with us because it didn't start with us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.